so uncomfortable, very heavy, that walked past him. There shouldn't have been anyone in those woods. His voice changes, and he is definitely feeling some kind of a weird emotion when he gets back there. My name is Thomas Henderson. I am 39 years old. I Let me think about this. So I talk about this a little bit in the book, but Harry and the Hendersons came out. I want to say I was like 2 years old when it came out. So by the time it hit the television, I was probably 5 or 6. And when that was my first encounter with the idea of there being something in the woods that isn't an ordinary creature that we hear about all the time. And I was fascinated with that movie. Of course, it was geared towards kids, and the Bigfoot in the movie was out to help the kid and the good people in the movie, and help against the antagonist of the film and whatnot. But I always thought that was neat, and it didn't seem like it was outrageous. It wasn't like it was a creature that looked so far fetched from the creatures that we have, that we see all the time. So it wasn't something that I was just like, oh, this is a fake creature or something like that. And I had asked my mom, I was like, are there really those things in the woods? And she kind of just brushed it off and was just like, oh no, I don't think so. But in that moment, I was just like, well, there's a movie about it. So where did this come from? And I just remember at a young age that anytime I seen a movie or anything, I was like, so there's more of this stuff. And I just kind of, in a weird way, just wanted to know more. Like, if there isn't one of these things, why are they making a movie about it? I just have always had a mindset that was questioning things. Not necessarily that I thought something weird was going on or we were being lied to or whatever. I just thought, why do we do this? Why is this popular? Whatever the case may be. And then, I do remember going to the library as a young kid, probably 12 or 13, after school. And the books that I would want to look at is anything that had to do with a Bigfoot or UFOs. And I just couldn't get enough. And I wanted to know why people think these things are real. Is there any validity to it? And of course, at that time, there was really nothing, out there that was definitive or whatever. And it was always the same stuff. It was the same stories, and there was never anything really new. And so I kind of like, just tried to get a hold of everything I could, whether it was books or movies or whatever. I remember getting the Boggy Creek movies with my dad, renting those, and he thought I was, I don't know what he thought, but he was just like, "Are you really wanting to watch this?" And I was like, "Yeah." And he goes, "They're not great movies. I remember seeing these a long time ago." And but I wanted to know as much as I could, even if it was in a movie form. What are they trying to tell us about these creatures? Um, so that's kind of how I got into it. And then, of course, once I've looked at everything that I could find. We're talking pre-internet, and at a certain point between the ages of 15 and 21, of course, my priorities shifted on things that I really wanted to learn about and care about. I became a big pro wrestling fan, and things like that, and even was a independent professional wrestler for a little while when I was in my early 20s. But it was always in the back of my mind. And once the internet became bigger, and you could kind of search for things, and I learned more things that I wasn't aware of because it wasn't at my reach. I went further into that rabbit hole, and always just wanted to know more and wanted to understand if it's possible why there's so many people having these sightings, and you know what's the bottom of it. If it is true, why is it being denied so much? Is there, something bigger going on that we don't know? And I'm just very curious in that way. There's a lot of subjects that I'm that way about. But yeah, that's how I got started into it. And with the internet ever growing, and the more technology there is, the easier it is to communicate. The more I try to look at more stuff and try to understand things. And that's kind of how it got me into wanting to um, just learn more about it and talk to people who may have had experiences.
So, in your process of learning more about it and talking to people, what have you learned and what have you done?
Well, the biggest thing that I learned is that there's many theories on what this is, where it comes from, and how it interacts with us. And I find that fascinating. Not only are there very different encounters and ideas of what's going on, but some of them also have very similar um, attributes to their stories. So, when I talked to a gentleman over in Scotland who told me a story that I ended up putting in the book, he had very similar, remarks and ideas that someone that was in North America was telling me. And it wasn't stuff that was more on the surface of the Bigfoot community. It was more stuff that um, might be fringe, I guess, things that the majority of the people that I talked to did not have those kind of ideas. But I thought it was very strange that very different parts of the world kind of had the same idea. Not saying that I 100% believe them on it, but I do believe that they believe it. And I think that's what's most powerful about what I've learned is that the people that I've talked to now, don't get me wrong, I did interview a lot of people for my book, and there were some that I did not put in there because of the connection that we had. I didn't feel that it was as genuine as it needed to be. There was something missing or whatever. So the people that I put in my book made me feel a certain way where I 100% believe that they believe their story. And I feel like that's something that I'm fairly good at, is a judge of character and things like that. Part of what I do for my what I call my real job is I'm an investigator for a retail company, and I have had some training on interviewing people and learning how they respond to things, um, and can kind of tell when they're trying to deviate from what is truth and things like that. So, I was able to kind of narrow down who I chose by using those kind of tactics. But it made those stories to me even stronger, the ones that I connected with, even though some of them sounded far fetched.
Well, tell me on this person that had something that was kind of a little bit different, a little bit on the fringe, but then you had other people that also had similar experiences. What did he tell you that made you think it was so, I guess, different than just an ordinary experience?
So, the biggest part of it is the potential for genetic modification, where DNA has been altered to create different physical attributes and mental capacity type things, um, which 10 years ago I would have said that's the craziest thing I've ever heard of. But we know that scientists are messing with DNA now and genetically modifying things and creating things. I mean, we know that they can create, animals from a petri dish and things like that. So it doesn't sound as far fetched to me as it did would have 10 years ago, but it's still something that, if that would be true, that these creatures were genetically modified in some way, um, and potentially from another planet, that how do I say it? Because I'm not a scientist by any means, but if they were a creature from somewhere else and their DNA was modified to become what they are, and that would be something that, you know, would be very hard for the normal person to comprehend and rationalize with, if that's a possibility. And I'm not saying I believe that. However, they did 100% believe that. And, with everything that's going on in the world, we know that we've been lied to for ever, beginning of time, about the way things really work in a lot of things. And don't get me wrong, I love a conspiracy theory, but I think we can all admit in the year 2023 that there are definitely a lot of conspiracies that have turned out to be fact. And is this another one of those? I want the answers, and that's why I'm interested. I want to know why people think the way they do and things like that. It's a wild world out there, and there's a lot of stuff going on. If you look at what's going on in Congress with the UFO hearings, and I don't know how much you're familiar with all of that, but they're literally discussing non-human biologics that we have recovered. What that means, I have no idea. But the more we hear about that kind of stuff in the mainstream, is one of two things. Either it's not true at all and it's to distract us from something else, or it is true and they're slowly letting us know this information for, whatever reason. They can't contain it anymore, the way the world is with technology. And they don't want mass panic. I don't know. I don't have the answers, and that's why I love these subjects so much, is that I want answers. So I want to know what everyone's opinion is on it, so that, there's things that I'll learn that, just like the genetic modification, I'd never put that in the context of what a Bigfoot could be until I heard that. And then when I heard it a second time from someone on a different continent, I was like, okay, there are people out there that believe this. Now, I don't think the majority of people believe that. I think the majority of people that I talk to believe that Bigfoot is just a primate of sorts that is, you know, roaming around our world. That, maybe the population isn't as high as a lot of animals, and maybe there is something to its ability to hide itself in some ways that is different than what we, know or imagine. Um, and there's a lot to that as well. There's, so many different theories on that that I find interesting. And I think about different animals that we do currently know that, we have, you know, that scientists do agree that exist, whether it be an octopus at the bottom of the ocean that, can completely change the way it looks, the way its skin structure is, so that it blends in and looks exactly like the plants that it is hiding in. Like, we know there are animals that do those kind of things, chameleons and things like that. But what makes that octopus so intriguing is that not only does it change the color, it can mimic the texture and shape of the plants that are at the bottom of the ocean, so that it looks just like that plant, so that when something comes along, it can eat it and it doesn't know that it's there. So who are we to say that there aren't other animals that do that same thing? And that's I guess that's my biggest thing, is we don't know until we know. And I want to know more.
For sure. So the people that you interviewed that had just like a flesh and blood experience with Bigfoot, what were some of the most interesting things that you found out?
As far as the flesh and blood and the interesting, um, the biggest thing for me is that it seems to be that these encounters, these people weren't in any real danger. That either the thing just kind of looked at them and then took off and avoided them, or it was sending them a message to stay away, whether it be throwing rocks or um, the vocalizations, very deep vocalizations that would make you um, know that there's something big that doesn't want you there. But they weren't like attacked, if that makes sense. So I find that super interesting that, you know, my kind of conclusion on what I would believe is that these things aren't obviously trying to hurt humans in any way, or we would see attacks and things like that. But they just want to live their lives and they don't want to be, messed with. And to me, that makes sense for them to be so elusive if they understand that they are different and maybe they've had so many experiences in their generation and generation before where they know to stay away from humans because they will probably kill them because we kill everything, whether we do it for just evil or we do it for food or sport or whatever. Humans are killers, and that's just the facts about it. And just like any other animal in the forest, they they try to stay away from humans for the most part. All of them are that way, until there are instances where if they're around humans at a young age and things, you can kind of domesticate some animals or you know things like that. But for the most part, if they're wild, they avoid us at all cost. So to me, that's the most interesting thing is that I don't think these creatures are out there trying to do anything but live their lives.
Heard a few cases just recently where a Bigfoot was like habitual on a property and began to invade someone's space, coming into their house and was kind of vicious. Have you heard you, but you didn't hear any of those stories?
Not from the ones that I interviewed. Now I have heard those stories, and I do find those fascinating. And it, I wonder, is it, you know, just like what we would do if we had a house and we had invaders. Um, we would try to protect our spot, our people, whatever. Um, is it possible that they feel that that land is theirs and they don't want to give it up? And I feel like they're very nomadic and they move around a lot, and they may not be there all the time, but when it's time to go back there, if there's someone occupying it, I'm sure there could be that. And let's be honest, if they're anything like humans, we have humans that are evil. We have humans that are wouldn't hurt a fly, and why wouldn't they be the same if they were um, more like us than what other animals are? We're not talking about a deer or a fox or something like that. But even other animals, they all have kind of different personalities. Dogs are that way. Some dogs, even if you treat them right and everything, they're just kind of have that wild instinct. You don't want to mess with them while they're eating, things like that. Um, it's always possible that there are some out there that are just um, ready for a fight or ready to take over. Maybe they want to conquer whatever they see. I don't know. It is fascinating. But from the experiences where I've talked to individuals, they've not had that actually happen in that manner.
So what motivated you to write the book?
So I wanted to do something. I am a co-host of a wrestling podcast, the Hot Tag Hooligans Pro Wrestling Podcast Show on YouTube. It's on Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. And I was talking with my co-host, and I was like, I may want to just like maybe do another podcast and talk about Bigfoot and get people on because I want to know what they think. I want to know the stories that are currently going around from people, and be able to actually have a conversation with someone instead of just hearing a story. That's where I think I find the most information is from a dialogue. There's a lot of stuff that floats around on online that may or may not be true. There's a lot of people wanting clout and wanting likes and all this stuff, and we know there's hoaxers. That it's a big problem. It really hurts the community. I believe that if that wasn't going on, we wouldn't have near as hard time people wanting to look into this more. But I wanted those conversations. I wanted to go deeper than just what's online and what I could find. I wanted to hear more about stuff. And we were about it 6 months into doing our podcast, and I was like, I really want to do something. And I was talking to a coworker of mine, and he knows that I'm always talking about what I've seen latest on Bigfoot and things that are people are talking about or whatever. And he goes, my wife was just telling me a story from where she lives, where she encountered a Bigfoot. And he goes, and it's the wildest story I've ever heard her tell because of the way she tells it. It's not that anything crazy really happened, but the way she told the story, he goes, she definitely seen it. He goes, he said, I know her and I know how she talks. And when she's telling this story, she's emotional. You know, she she can kind of relay that feeling that she had that day when she's talking about it. I said, well, I'd love to talk to her about it. I would love her to tell me the story. And I think that's what really spiked it. Is I talked to her about it, and I felt the same way. She was with her young child at the time, and she was scared, even though in a way she didn't feel threatened, but she was feeling very she was feeling protective. So she wanted to make sure that nothing happened, and she couldn't believe her eyes. And when she seen this creature, and it was walking along the banks of the Big Muddy River, and she had heard as a kid because she grew up in Murfreesboro, Illinois, and they kind of have this local legend. There was a lot of police reports um, back before she was born, and so it was something that would come up every now and again, and people would kind of talk about it. But she told me this story, and I was like, "Do you tell people this very often?" And she's like, "No." She goes, "Nobody believes me." And she's like, it's not worth telling people about because they just look at me differently. And I thought, that's kind of, a bad place to be if you have something that has affected you so much and you really can't even talk about it. So I was like, really like, I need to do something. And my co-host of the podcast, make a long story not as long, um, he is an author, and he's wrote a few books on pro wrestling, and he interviewed pro wrestlers and talked about their stories. Rising up in the ranks of independent wrestling and trying to make towns and make money and hopefully make it to TV at some point. And so he was like, the podcast is fine and all. I said, or he was like, but just why don't you just write a book? He goes, it's not that difficult. He's like, we interview wrestlers all the time. Just interview them and then, tell their story. And then, add your thoughts on what their story is and help bring that story to life. And it just clicked. It was just like, I can do that. Even though never in my life did I dream I would actually do that. I always thought it would be cool to write. I used to write little short stuff, and I you know would write things that I would think about posting on Facebook and then just wouldn't post it, because I'm most of the time I'm pretty silly and I like to have fun and whatever, and I don't get too serious a lot of times. And I would write some stuff and then just not post it, and then but I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the writing part of it, even though I don't consider myself very intelligent. I mean, I did graduate high school, but I never went to college. I went to work right out of high school. I've been working at a retailer. In February will be 20 years. So I know, business and managing people and things like that. But as far as, putting a book together, um, I've read some books, but that's about it. And if it wasn't for the connection with the people and me wanting to tell their stories, I don't know if it would have come together as easy as it did for me. So once I
What you
started in on
so
each
basically what
chapter,
you so basically what you wanted to do was to tell people's Bigfoot stories out there, right? So
yes.
share some of those stories with me. What did you find?
So um, one of the stories that I find fascinating. A gentleman who I was connected with through my father-in-law, because he shops his business, and had mentioned a story to him about some property he has down in Kentucky, and how he had a crazy experience. So I was like, okay, if you give me his phone number, I'll talk to him. I talked to him for over an hour on the phone. Um, he tells me about a property that he bought. It's an unincorporated town, if you will. It's not, and the nearest actual city is like 30 minutes away or whatever, in either direction. And they don't have like a local police department, fire department, hospital, like nothing. It's just, you know, basically woods. There's it's called the Jones Keeney Wildlife Management Area. Um, and then there's just homes that are kind of sprinkled throughout, in that area. And he bought this property so that he could, hunt on it, or spend time, just away from his normal life and his home and things like that. Just kind of like he was going to put a little house or something on it, so that he could get away. And as he was clearing it out, and he had found some caves on the property and was crawling down in them, trying to get them out. He had an encounter with something that he said was taller than him, and mind you, he's almost 7 foot tall. I think he's like 6'8" or 9. I can't remember now. I'm horrible with numbers, but he's right at 7 foot tall. And this thing was bigger than him and twice as wide, in a muscular body type. And it was brown hair to toe. And he said that the face of it kind of looked like a German Shepherd. And he said that it made a growl, and he said it shook him to his core. His whole body shook from this growl. And it never like attacked him, but it was walking towards his direction. Because he had told me previously that he was on his four-wheeler and he thought that he may have ran over a youngling. There was something brown that was smaller that he was going through this brush, and he may have ran it over, and whatever it was made a loud howl when it happened. And then that's when this thing appeared in the tree line, which wasn't that far away from him, that made out this growl, almost like a in shock that the the youngling was hurt. The way he describes it was that it was worried about the youngling, but it let out this thing that was so powerful that he got out of there, got on the four-wheeler, drove to his truck, and left. And he never went back to that property. He spent $40,000 on this property. He had an experience that was so dramatic. He has never went back, and it's been almost 5 years, I think, since he's been there. And to me, if I spent 40 grand on a property, of course, 40 grand to me is a lot of money. That's, I mean, that's a not that's a life changing money. If someone just handed me 40 grand, I wouldn't be giving up, even if there was. Well, I say that I hadn't had an encounter, so maybe I would change my mind then. But me rationally thinking about it, I don't think that I would do that. I think I would figure out what was there and try to eradicate it. But it was so powerful to him, he's never went back. I mean,
Wow.
that's to me, I mean, that says everything that I need to know about how he feels.
True. The description sounds a little bit more like a dog man than a Bigfoot, though.
Yes, I agree. Um, it's one of those things that I don't know. I mean, people when they see things, I mean, who really knows? But I don't know that if there's a connection between the two, a Sasquatch or a dog man or whatever that they actually are. I have no idea. But it's the same type of characteristics that he described as the other ones did, except for the face description, if that makes any sense.
Sure. Do have any of the people you've interviewed talked about orbs or UFOs or craft being around their sightings?
The one from Scotland basically said they are aliens. So he didn't say that there were any craft there when he had his encounter or anything, but he told me that they were from another planet and they were genetically modified. That they are not a animal that was born on this, or not an animal from this planet, that they were from somewhere else. He said there's definitely a connection. He said their DNA or biologics did come from another planet on a craft to get here, but he did not witness an actual orb or craft.
No one else you interviewed did either.
No, not an actual craft or orb.
So have you ever gone out to see if you can see one of these things or try to have an encounter yourself?
So yes, so the big one was I went to the story I was just telling you about with the potential dog man. Um, I needed some more follow up from him, and he had gotten sick, and I hadn't been able to get a hold of him. And I was really, he was my, I had everything else done with the book, and I needed to finish his chapter. And so I was like, the only thing I know to do to add some depth and detail into this chapter is if I try to go there myself and at least see the area and can talk about the area and things like that. So I took a buddy of mine, Alex Castile, and we went to his property. However, we couldn't get on it; it was blocked with gates and stuff. But right across the street is that Jones Keeney Wildlife Management Area. So I mean, at one time the forest was all the forest. I mean, it's only got a road in between it, and nothing else around, and it's just property. It's just land and trees and all that. So we decided to go through this Jones Keeney Wildlife Management Area because we were able to get into it. Now, it doesn't look like they've kept up with this place in years. So we did find a couple of trails that were terrible. They've definitely not maintained. I don't think a lot of people go there. It's very different than like I've been to the Garden of the Gods a couple times, and people are there all the time. There's humans there constantly, and you can tell that they keep up with it, and it's nice or whatever. So going through this area in the Jones Keeney Wildlife Management Area, uh, really felt like just walking through the woods. I mean, there was some parts that had a trail that you could kind of stay on, but it was fairly narrow in most parts, and you're just walking through the woods. Um, and then we did come across a stretch of it's kind of an incline, and it was a little muddy, and we did come across about 9 footprints. Um, they were all about the same shape. However, one of them was more defined than the others. And I did snap a picture of it, and I did include it in the book. Um, it's not, to me, it's not definitive that there's something there. I I feel like I'm pretty reasonable to think. Don't jump to conclusions that this is a footprint for sure, because I don't know what I'm looking at, but it's what it looks like. It looks like a footprint, and it looks like there was about 9 of them, and they had a stride that was probably 4 feet, 4.5 feet wide, and they were all about the same length apart, going up this little incline that was muddy. We did find that kind of strange. And then the other weird thing that happened that I can't really explain is that we were driving, when we got out of there, we were driving down on the side of his property. There's a little road that's probably 500 feet from where his property entrance is. So if you go down that road, technically the forest on the right is his property. And then there's somebody else owns the property on the other side that's more forest. So we're driving down that road. We have the windows down. We're driving really slow, just kind of looking, just seeing what everything looks like. Can we see anything moving? Any kind of wildlife. We were trying to document what we see there. If we seen deer or um, anything, coyotes, whatever. And it's very quiet. We're going down through there. And then we got about halfway down this road that was probably about a mile, I'd say. And I started kind of having a weird feeling. It's kind of feeling a little nauseous, not like I was going to need to pull over and throw up, but I just kind of felt a little uneasy. And I just felt weird. I felt uncomfortable. And I'm not going to say anything because I'm not going to look like I'm this big wimp or whatever. And my buddy's sitting next to me. And then, so I'm just kind of holding it together, going slow, looking around, still feeling kind of sick to my stomach a little bit. And I'm ready to turn around and get off this road because it just makes me feel weird. But in that moment, he looks over at me, and I guess he didn't care what he looked like. He said, "Man, I feel sick. I feel like I'm gonna throw up." And I said, "Are you serious right now?" And I said, "I'm feeling the same way." And at that point, I kind of did a little 3-point turnaround or whatever, and I went the other way on the road to get out of there. And I said, "That's so weird that you said that. I felt the same way." And I wasn't even going to say anything. Like, I wasn't going to say a word because I didn't want to look like I was being scared or whatever. But when he said that to me, I thought, man, that's weird. It's I can't explain that. think of all the possibilities. Maybe there was something chemical in the air. Who knows? There could have been somebody cooking drugs back in the woods. I don't know. I have no idea. But I know that I felt so uncomfortable that I started feeling in my stomach that like a little nauseous. And it was almost like immediately whenever we turned off of that road back onto the main road in between where the wildlife management area is and his property, it went away. Maybe absolutely nothing, but it's a weird coincidence. And had I said something first and then he said, "Oh, I feel the same way," I don't know that I would have necessarily believed it. I'd have been like, "You're pulling my leg." But the fact that I wasn't going to say anything and then he said the way he was feeling was the same way I was feeling, I found that very odd. But it may have nothing to do with anything. It just could have been just something that happened. I don't really know.
You
But that's
recognize any, did you recognize any type of sounds that were going on or any kind of odor that was happening?
so in that area, it was pretty quiet. I mean, I don't even remember hearing birds chirp or anything. It was super quiet. Now, when we were over in the Jones Keeney Wildlife Management area, we did get a strong smell of a skunk odor, um, briefly, and then it dissipated pretty quickly. And then, of course, we thought, yeah, of course, we're gonna think that's something. But we both like, there's definitely skunks out here, so it's nothing. I'm sure it's nothing. But we did kind of have that. And, I think that way a lot of times. People say they smell a strong smell, and, there could be something rotting or whatever. There's a lot of things that could be, unless you have that smell and a sighting. I don't know that it really means anything. I try to be objective when I talk about those kind of things because there's a lot of things that can smell pretty funky, especially out in the woods.
Right. So then what happened? You left and you didn't ever go back, or?
I have been back since then. I took my wife down there to drive around one night. The night that we went, because we actually went in the evening hours when it's starting to get dark, which was a little creepier. But we went down that same road and I did not feel the same way. I kind of wanted to see if I did, and I felt nothing. But we seen a lot of animals that night. We seen several deer, rabbits, raccoons. There was stuff everywhere, which I thought was, a little weird, but it was a different time of day at night. Maybe, the forest is more active because whatever reason, I don't know. But there was a lot of animals moving when we were out there that night. But I never did see anything other than them. But so
No,
I've
no
actually been down there
vocals or
twice.
no real
No,
sounds of any sort at all. Just that strange feeling.
yep, a very strange feeling that I've never felt before, and I haven't felt since.
So is that the only time you've ever gone out to actually do any type of research on
Um,
your
I
own?
did go. I did go to one of the other chapters in the book. At It's near Lincoln State Park in Indiana. Um, I went to his property, the Kyle Westby's property, and he told me his story while we were there, and I recorded it for the book and everything, so that I would have all the information. And he showed me the area and a rundown of everything that took place. And for him, he had a lot of things that were weird that had happened. The first thing was that him and his buddy were hunting at night, and he was sitting on the ground, leaned up on a tree, and his buddy was in a tree stand that was, 100 feet away or whatever, and he heard something that was very heavy that walked past him, probably 30 feet away. And he said it was definitely different than normal animals that he hears running or walking in the woods. He said as long as he's hunted, he can tell what it sounds like when a deer runs by, or a rabbit hopping through, or squirrels scurrying, whatever. He said this sounded like and felt, because he said he could feel the vibrations of it coming through. He said it was a large bipedal animal. And he said that, I think he said he was like 250 pounds or whatever. He said this thing was way bigger than him. And he said he knows what it sounds like when another human is walking by. And he said this thing was big. He said he couldn't see because it was so dark. He said, but it really freaked him out. And then he had some other things happen. And right after that, his buddy that he was hunting with in the tree stand said that he had heard it too. But they also had smelled a very foul smell, especially his buddy. It was real strong over by the tree stand where he was at. Um, and so I thought that was kind of odd too. But he also had some instances on his property where he was just kind of trying to see what would interact with certain things. So, like, he hung a chicken in a tree, and it was tied up there by like a thick string or whatever. And he said that the next day when he went to look at it, the string had been untied and the chicken was gone. And there was like maybe a few pieces of the chicken scrap or whatever at the bottom, but something untied it. He thought that was strange. He had put a bunch of trail cameras up, and he said the weird thing was that it took all kinds of pictures, but there were things that happened that it didn't take pictures of, like a big branch was leaned up against a tree or whatever, and then it was gone. And it took all these pictures of, I mean, he said it was just going through pictures for, forever, just looking at all these pictures it was taken. And, but it didn't take a picture of who put the branch there and then who took it away. And we're talking like a big branch, not, I mean, a human could do it for sure, but there shouldn't have been anyone in those woods at that time. Like, it's private property. Like, yeah, is it possible? Yes. But it was very strange that it didn't pick it up on the trail cameras and, things like that. Now, he's not afraid of being on that property. He does say that at the back of the woods, towards the end of where his property ends, he does get a little nervous and weird feeling back there. And I was able to witness that as he's telling me that story, and we get closer and closer to the back of his property, his voice changes. And he is definitely feeling some kind of a weird emotion when he gets back there. And then he's like, I've got goosebumps. And he goes, every time I come back here in this area, I get goosebumps. And he showed me his arm, and his hair was standing straight up and full-fledged goosebumps on his arms. And that was all I needed from him to know that he believes what he thinks happened. And he believes that there is something on that property that is not normal, that is very large, and it does things that doesn't make sense. Now, there's not anything there that's provable or anything like that, but it's the way he tells the story and how it makes him feel that makes me believe that what he's saying he believes 100%. And he's a rational guy. I've known him since we weren't like the best of buddies or anything, but I knew him in school. He's owns his own business, very successful, has a family, like just a normal person, very rational guy. But I'm telling you, he 100% believes that there is a creature on his property that is very large and does things that doesn't make sense.
Right. Well, I think that, a lot of people have some form of a habitual clan of Bigfoot or other creatures probably on their property, and occasionally they have awareness that they're there. Did he ever say if he had found any evidence beyond just that feeling?
He had seen some carcasses that were destroyed and like not in a manner that he'd ever seen before from typical like a deer that dies or whatever. Um, he definitely thinks that something was, very large was chomping into it and destroying it, tearing it apart. There wasn't a whole lot left but bones. Um, but other than that, there's not been any like real physical evidence that he's found.
Mhm. So no prints or structures unexplained or anything like that.
No, most of this area, well, I mean, when I went, it was covered in leaves. I would be curious to what it would look like in the spring or summer. I probably need to take another trip up there just to kind of see because I hadn't really thought about it that way. But there is an old abandoned house that his grandparents had lived in years ago that's fallen apart, and there's still a kind of a structure there. Definitely could be a place where a creature could hide under and get out of the weather or whatever. Um, but he hadn't seen any actual prints or anything there. No.
I had most of the people you interviewed, did they have evidence to back up maybe an encounter that they'd had?
Um. So the gentleman that I talked to, his name is Ray Harwood. I know he's wrote some like comic books and stuff. But he talks about some prints that he had cast and things like that. That he that to him, I mean, obviously, I wasn't there when he cast them, but he believes it's physical evidence.
Right. Well, a lot of people do have some form of a cast of a print for sure.
Right.
Those are good telltale signs that can verify or back up, if you have more than one thing backing up what you're saying or seeing, it helps for sure. So,
Right.
what is the name of your book?
It is Stories of Bigfoot Living with Truth. And when I started writing this book, I just wanted to tell Bigfoot stories. I thought, I always wanted that as I was researching and looking into things. I wanted more stories. But as I started interviewing the people, the book kind of shifted into more about how they're coping with having these encounters and living with that fact. Can they tell people about it? Are they accepted? Have they been, cast aside by family and friends? How does it make them feel going forward in society, knowing what they know? And that's what I think stands apart from just a regular Bigfoot story. Is I talk about how it makes them feel, and how they have, you know, really how they move forward. There's some that talk about how that they have lost family and friends over it because they think they're crazy. They think that they've got problems they need to address, and they're just telling them a story that happened to them. They believe that 100% happened to them, and then it's changing their life forever in that way. Now, I know there's probably a lot of people that maybe it doesn't affect that way, and they don't have a problem telling whoever, and it doesn't affect them mentally. But the thing that I notice most is that the majority of these people they kind of needed an outlet, and I think that it showed in their telling of their story to me, that they really needed to talk about it, and they feel like it's not something they can really talk about all the time. And I think that's really important. I don't think we should assume someone is lying, and we need to listen to them for what they are. And like I said, I'm not saying that I'm a believer that every story and everything in here is true, but I believe that they believe 100% that it is true, and I support them on that. And if it helps them for me to get this out, look, I didn't write this book to get rich. I just wrote a book. You know what I'm saying? Like I am an author somehow, but that's not I have a full-time job. I am very interested in this phenomenon, and I wanted to tell these stories and then get them out there because these people, I really feel like they need to tell their story to people who are not going to judge them and make them feel less than for their story.
Right, exactly. Well, I really appreciate you sharing your story about writing the book and all the interesting people you interviewed. And your journey has been one that adds a contribution to the whole Bigfoot phenomena in and of itself. So I appreciate the interview today. I'm going to go ahead and end this today, and I'll let you know when this interview comes out. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.